I'm opposed to the war crimes that happened on October the 7th and the war crimes that have happened since October the 7th. Douglas, no, I've got to finish this point. I've got to finish this point. Douglas, the week after October the 7th, came out in The Spectator and advocated for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, which is a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute. He said now is
not true.
You said now is a good time to do it. And by the way, this whole argument, why didn't you protest Sudan? Why didn't you protest Syria? Last time I checked, the United States Congress does not fund Bashar al-Assad or the RSF militias in Sudan. So stop with this lazy whataboutism.
Douglas Murray stepped onto that stage expecting to control the moral high ground and treat Mehdi Hasan like a student who needed correcting. Instead, the entire night flipped on him. Hasan didn't meet him with vibes, slogans. He met him with structure, receipts, and a refusal to let slippery claims slide. And once that happened, Murray's confidence stopped looking like strength and started looking like overreach. Stay with this one, because what unfolds isn't just a clash of opinions, it's a live demonstration of what happens when someone tries to dominate a serious topic with rhetorical shortcuts and gets forced to answer for them. Before we jump in, tell me where you're watching from, drop your country in the comments, hit like, and let's get into how this debate turns into a full-on takedown.
When I was last here a couple of years ago, I just returned from the front line of the war in Ukraine, where I was with the Ukrainian armed forces. And for most of the last 8 months, I've been in Israel and Gaza, following the war there as closely as I can. And I won't go into all the details now that I could give you of what's happening. But I would just put it in perspective in this way, first of all. What happened on the 7th of October was not just a massive attack on innocent people inside Israel. It was the equivalent to about 6,000 Canadians being massacred and burned in their homes in one day. It's the equivalent of about 1,500 of your fellow Canadians being taken hostage. You know, you would have thought after an attack like the one that Hamas instigated, that started this terrible war, you would have thought that there would be some sympathy for the world, from the world. You might have thought the world would pay attention to the attack and at least pay attention to the people behind it. You might have expected, like me, that there might have been a worldwide opposition to the terrorists and rapists and murderers of Hamas. You might have thought there would be hatred around the world erupting at the government of Qatar and its mouthpiece, Al Jazeera, its funding of Hamas and its hosting of the leadership of Hamas in Qatar. You might have thought there'd have been an outpouring of rage at the Islamic Revolutionary Government in Tehran, but no. There was an immediate outpouring of rage against the state that had been attacked. You know, the interesting thing about anti-Semitism is that it's a shape-shifting virus. It moves across the centuries. Now, the Jews are hated not for their religion or their race, but for having a state. People around the world hate them so much for it. They were hated for being stateless. Remember, rootless cosmopolitans, the far right used to say. Today, the only really acceptable form of anti-Semitism, aside from the sewers of the far right, the only real tolerated form of anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism.
In 1917, over 100 years ago, Arthur Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, a card-carrying anti-Semite, a man who had denounced the evils of Jewish immigration into the UK, a man who referred to Jews as an alien and hostile people, he issued his Balfour Declaration, which promised a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. It was the first time a major world power had come out in favor of Zionism, which at the time was a pretty new and pretty controversial movement, calling not just for a Jewish homeland, but for the building of a Jewish majority state in Palestine. And yet the only Jewish member of the British cabinet at that time, a man named Edwin Samuel Montagu, adamantly opposed both Zionism, which he called a mischievous political creed, and the Balfour Declaration, which he referred to as anti-Semitic and a rallying ground for anti-Semites in every country in the world. The only Jewish member of the British cabinet, that is what he said. And yet tonight here in Toronto, over 100 years later, we are being asked to vote for a motion that would damn Montague as the anti-Semite while praising Balfour as the champion of Jews and Judaism. That's ridiculous. In fact, this entire motion tonight is ridiculous. The motion says anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. No ifs, no buts, no caveats, no exceptions. Anyone who takes an anti-Zionist position is automatically, inherently, unavoidably anti-Jewish, an anti-Semite, a racist. By the way, on the subject of Gaza, Gibbon Douglas gave us some math about the death toll on October the 7th, horrific death toll, which we all condemn. I would remind you also that the death toll inflicted on Gaza, the deaths and injuries in Gaza are the equivalent, if we're going to do the ratios, of 2 million Canadians. 2 million Canadians. But that's not what the debate is about. It's not even about Zionism itself. It's about the legitimacy of anti-Zionism, whether you can be anti-Zionist, opposed to Zionism, which remember is a political ideology, a nationalist movement, not a religion, not a race, not a protected class, whether you can be anti-Zionist without being smeared, tarred, demonized as an anti-Semite. Because this motion is not about whether you are pro-Israel or pro-Zionist. It's about whether the rest of us have the right, the freedom to take a different view on Israel, on Zionism, on Benjamin Netanyahu even, without being silenced, without being told we're racists. We're not. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. I'll tell you 3 reasons why. 3 reasons why you should oppose this motion tonight. Number 1, if you vote for this motion tonight, you are throwing logic, history, and the English language under the bus. Because anti-Semitism is hating Jews, the people, and Judaism, the religion. Anti-Zionism is opposing Israel, the state, and Zionism, the ethno-nationalist ideology that underpins that state. Zionism is not Judaism. Let me say that again for the people up top. Zionism is not Judaism, right? It's a very modern, secular, political ideology, movement that was founded less than 150 years ago by an atheist named Theodore Herzl, who said, and I quote, "The anti-Semites will be our most dependable friends, the anti-Semitic countries our allies." His words, not mine. Number 2, if you vote for this motion, you're throwing Palestinians as a people under the bus. You're telling an occupied people, a dispossessed people, to accept their own occupation, their own dispossession, meekly, in silence. Otherwise, they're racists. As my friend Yusuf Manaya, the Palestinian-American activist, says, to ask Palestinians not to be anti-Zionist is to ask Palestinians not to be. And number 3, last but not least, if you vote for this motion, you're throwing a lot of Jews under the bus as well. Not just Jews like Edwin Samuel Montague, but Jews today. If you vote for this motion tonight, you're saying my debate partner, Gideon Levy, whose grandparents were killed in the Holocaust, who served for Shimon Peres, who's written for Haaretz for over 40 years, just won Israel's top journalism prize 3 years ago, he's an anti-Semite. You're saying the Satmar, the world's biggest Hasidic Jewish sect, which says it is fighting God's war against Zionism, is anti-Semitic. You're saying Jewish college students on campus, maybe some of them are your kids, members of If Not Now and Jewish Voices for Peace, they're anti-Semites. You're saying some of the most respected Jewish voices in the world, like Avraham Berg, the former Speaker of the Parliament, Miriam Margolis, the actress from Harry Bloody Potter, they're all anti-Semites. That is what you are saying. That is what you're signing off on if you vote for this motion tonight. So I have a simple solution for you all. Don't do it. Vote instead for common sense, for free speech, and the right to criticize a foreign country, the right to criticize a foreign country and a political ideology. I beg to oppose. Thank you.
Let me just say a couple of things about that I didn't get to in my opening remarks, but are important. You know, if you didn't throng the streets of this city or any other for the actual genocide going on in Sudan, not the one that Mehdi and Gideon pretend is happening, but the actual genocide going on in Sudan, if you didn't spend weekend after weekend doing that, but you did come out for the post-October the 7th protests, you're an anti-Semite. If you protested not a bit, didn't set up a tent when Bashar al-Assad was killing 6 times the number of people in a decade that Israel and all of its enemies have lost in 75 years of war, you are an anti-Semite.
This debate for me tonight is fascinating because for years Douglas has been the free speech warrior and I've been the guy saying there's no right to absolute free speech. Tonight I feel the roles are reversed. I'm here to say, what happened to free speech? What happened to the ability to criticize others, governments, countries, yes, political ideologies, right? So this is ridiculous, this argument that we are being expected to believe that if you don't support Israel as it is currently constituted, with Jewish supremacy, as Gideon points out, that makes you an anti-Semite. It's an abuse of anti-Semitism. It empties at a very important concept, at a very urgent time, of all meaning, in order to defend a country which, as Gideon has pointed out, and which Douglas seems to think is fine, has killed tens of thousands of innocent people in recent months.
I don't know, maybe. Have you ever been there?
Yes.
When?
A few years ago, not recently. I don't get awards from the president of Israel like you do, so I don't get to do softball interviews with Netanyahu. I didn't get invited into Gaza. Douglas, you said in your speech.
Let me finish my point.
But you went to Gaza, right? You said you went to Gaza. How come you went to Gaza when the world's media is not allowed into Gaza?
There's two reasons.
But they took you into Gaza.
Well, first of all, I'll explain.
I just want to deal with one point very important here. Douglas is the great journalist in Israel. I love this. Cosplaying as a journalist, going into Gaza with the IDF. Douglas interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu in January. Douglas did not. You're very bothered by Qatar and funding Hamas.
They're your bosses.
But well, we're talking about bosses. Let's talk to this.
You're literally paid by them.
I've interviewed Qatari officials. You can go on YouTube and watch my interviews with Qatari officials. And then you can watch Douglas interview Benjamin Netanyahu, where he asked him pearls like, is there another chapter left in the Netanyahu biography? That was the strong question. He didn't ask Benjamin Netanyahu, why did you work with Qatar to fund Hamas all those years? Why did you prop up Hamas all those years? Why, according to today's Israeli media, did you have reports that there was going to be an attack on your citizens and completely allow that to happen? Douglas didn't ask any of those questions. Instead, he'd like to spray around Hamas at the Muslim on the stage. They keep telling us about the horrors of October the 7th. I agree. This side shares the revulsion against the horrors of October the 7th, but we also share revulsion against the horrors that came since October the 7th. We don't support those horrors. I'm opposed to the war crimes that happened on October the 7th and the war crimes that have happened since October the 7th. Douglas, no, I've got to finish this point. Douglas, the week after October the 7th, came out in The Spectator and advocated for the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, which is a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute. He said now is
not true.
You said now is a good time to do it. And by the way, this whole argument, why didn't you protest Sudan? Why didn't you protest Syria? Last time I checked, the United States Congress does not fund Bashar al-Assad or the RSF militias in Sudan. So stop with this lazy whataboutism that gives you...
They do fund your friends in Tehran.
The US Congress funds Tehran.
You know very well Biden's package for Tehran.
What?
You don't know about it?
US funds Iran. Okay, you got me there, Douglas.
Wow.
But if you're going to focus on October 7th, then also focus on what happened since October the 7th, the erasure of Palestinians in this debate, the booing when Gideon mentions what happened to Palestinians. Shameful. I'm sorry to say, it's absolutely shameful and telling about what's going on. And I would say this, if we're going to talk about October 7th and what happened since, everyone's a liar. The Hamas health ministry is a liar. Everyone's a liar. Okay. Friend of mine, American doctor, goes to Gaza. Many doctors have gone to Gaza. You've seen them on the news. They're all liars, all Hamas, apparently. Friend of mine went to Gaza. He's been to Sudan. He doesn't just use it for whataboutism like Douglas. He's been to Sudan. He's been to Afghanistan. He's worked there. He came back from Gaza and said, I've never seen atrocities like I've seen here. What's happened to children? He's an anti-Semite because he saw children with burn wounds like he's never seen. He saw children with gunshot wounds to the head. To the head, but that's Hamas's fault. Everything is Hamas's fault. So let's talk about war crimes. It is amazing that every human rights group in the world, including Israeli human rights groups like B'Tselem, Gisha, Yeshdin, are all documenting this stuff, but you guys think it's all imaginary. So again, it tells you about what Zionism is. This is not about some abstract ideology of, people trying to settle the land and trying to have it. But as Gideon said, there was an argument to be had in the 1940s, 30s, 20s. Zionism today is what the Palestinians are enduring on a daily, nightly basis in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in Israel itself. And the erasure of that tells you everything about why we need to be able to talk about what Zionism does to the Palestinians without being smeared as anti-Semites. You're the guy who denied earlier that what you said in The Spectator, let's just be the clear context, we're talking about October 7th, October 7th. 5 days after October 7th, you said, maybe they will finally put an end to this insoluble nightmare, raise Hamas to the ground, or clear all the Palestinians from that benighted strip. It could be a good time to do it, but you tell this audience, we can live in peace side by side. That's a war crime. Ethnic cleansing is a war crime. Clearing people
No. I said maybe for a reason.
It
which
could
if you
be a
read
good time to do it.
for goodness sake.
Douglas,
sake.
just apologize and move on.
Brilliant.
Seriously. This entire debate is a distraction, a deflection, an attempt to make you look over here, not over there. There being Gaza, where they don't get to have protests on college campuses because the most moral army in the world wiped out 12 college campuses in Gaza. There being the West Bank, where a record number of children have been killed since October the 7th, even though the West Bank is not run by Hamas. There being Israel, where a government of self-proclaimed fascists and racists faces nightly protests from thousands of Jewish Israelis, including the families of hostages. But no, don't look over there. Look over here. Embrace this pernicious idea that those of us who oppose the way in which Israel was created, or what Israel has become, or how Israel treats its Palestinian minority, we're all somehow bigots, racists, anti-Jewish, even the Jews among us, like Gideon. Because remember, that is the motion tonight, not whether you support Israel or Zionism, which is fine, but whether the rest of us who don't are automatically anti-Semitic. By the way, what a weird and bizarre situation we find ourselves in tonight in Toronto, where we've had a British atheist of Christian descent, a non-Jew, telling the Jewish grandson of Holocaust victims who lives in Israel that he's an anti-Semite. What a bizarre debate. Tells you everything. Because he opposes the governing ideology of Israel. Think about how absurd that is. Think about how offensive that is. And then ask yourself the question, why would you vote for that? Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to vote against this flawed, false, and truly dangerous motion. Vote for free speech and common sense.
Mehdi Hasan didn't win this by being louder. He won by refusing to accept the framing Douglas Murray needed in order to survive the argument. Murray leaned on familiar moral theater to emotional comparisons, broad accusations, and the assumption that anyone challenging Israel's political ideology must be motivated by hatred. Hasan cut straight through that by insisting on definitions. Anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews. Zionism is a political project, and opposing a political project is not the same thing as targeting an entire people. That distinction matters because blurring it is not a harmless mistake, it's a strategy. Hasan made that obvious by showing how the anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism claim immediately collapses when you acknowledge a basic reality. Plenty of Jewish people, historically and today, reject Zionism or criticize the state of Israel without being anti-Semitic. When Hasan brought up Jewish anti-Zionists and dissenting Israeli voices, it wasn't name-dropping for effect. It was a direct challenge to the idea that one political view gets to define Jewish identity for everyone. Then Murray tried the classic escape hatch. Why aren't you protesting Sudan? Why not Syria? Hasan exposed that move for what it is, a diversion designed to shift attention away from the specific. Power structures being debated. If Western governments are funding, arming, and politically shielding one side, then scrutiny is not selective outrage, is accountability. Hasan's point wasn't that other atrocities don't matter. It was that what about somewhere else is not a rebuttal. It's a way to dodge the question in front of you. The most damaging part for Murray was when Hasan turned Murray's own public record into the center of gravity. Once Hasan confronted him with his past writing and forced him to answer for language that entertained mass displacement, the debate stopped being theoretical. Denials didn't land because the words were right there. At that point, Murray wasn't steering, he was backpedaling. What made Hasan's performance so effective is that he kept dragging the conversation back to the actual stakes: civilians, legal standards, power imbalance, and the right to criticize governments and ideologies without being smeared into silence. Murray wanted to win by policing speech. Hasan insisted that free debate and moral clarity required the opposite: the ability to name what's happening, challenge propaganda, and reject false binaries. By the end, the contrast was obvious. One side was relying on accusation and deflection to shut down dissent. The other was insisting that the entire motion was built to collapse criticism into racism, not to protect people from hatred, but to protect the government from accountability. And that's why Murray looked shaken, because Hasan didn't just argue with him, he took away the frame Murray needed to make his argument work.